Aloha Hawaii, this is Paul Kalainui and you are listening to Hawaiian Potpourri on radio station KWAI 1080 on your AM dial. Welcome to the program. Last week we spoke with Leon Siu and we spoke about the resolution of, I guess you can call it, political will of Hawaiians. And so we read through, excuse me, playing with the microphone, we read through several pages of this resolution that is on my website. If you'd like to see it, it's at www.hawaiianperspectives.org. And the resolution, the intent of the resolution is to have it submitted to the United Nations, setting forth the case of Hawaiian self-determination, essentially the right of Hawaiians to choose our future as we go into our future. And it is essentially founded on the principles of self-determination as established in international law. And one of the great supporters, one of the great contributors to the development of that sense of international law was America, that continent, that continental area of what has sometimes been called, I think, the Eastern Seaboard. The 13 colonies, the breaking away essentially of these colonies from their parent, Britain, and forming its own nation and its own, quote, state as recognized in international law, under a principle of the right of people to choose how they unfold into their futures. So under that principle, they now call that principle self-determination. Sometimes it's also referred to as self-government. Under that principle, international law became further developed, and the recognition of the right of people to divorce from their parent, to secede from their mother country, to become self-determining was established, and so it became a central part of the sense of international law, and that is of people having the right to determine their future. Hawaii came into the international arena in about 1770s, 1778. The contact between James Cook, as he was doing his scientific exploration in the Pacific, came to Hawaii, and so Hawaii, as it was introduced into Western nations, was introduced within that context of what international law had been, and very quickly Hawaii became recognized itself as a state in international law. There's some question about precisely what was that date, and we'll get further into that discussion. So this is the sort of the venue that Hawaii began to play within in terms of international law. I recognize that we do have a caller, so we'll go ahead and take the call, and I'm hoping that the call is relevant to our introductory remarks. Our telephone number here is 524-1080 in the event you would like to call and contribute to our discussion. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Aloha.
Yes.
Hey, something I wanted to bring up with you. This past week I heard an interview of Esper Kiaina.
Okay.
And the confession/apology resolution, yeah? Came up.
Yes.
And there was some discussion about the significance of that resolution and the significance of the Newland's resolution, the purported annexation resolution, yeah?
Right.
And so our dear brother Conklin, yeah, called up and tried to explain why, in his view, the Newland's resolution really matters and has a force of law. And what he essentially said was this. Now, you're an attorney, so you can share some insight on this. He said because the Newland's resolution contains a very powerful, as he put it, word, wherefore, yeah? That this gives that resolution the force of law. Now, we might add that, yes, but it's still only an American resolution, isn't it? And how is it that can penetrate international borders?
Yeah.
Even if it's, no matter how powerful you may think wherefore is. What is your understanding when the word wherefore is used in legislative acts?
In terms of its import or whether it steps a resolution up, that's wishful thinking. There's no foundation, no basis for that argument. I think if you're going to take a look at a resolution and its effectiveness, you need to see it within the broader, what they call a broader context. In this particular case, when the Newland's resolution was passed, it was in essence dealing with a subject matter that identifies treaties and how treaties ought to be adopted. Now, the Constitution of the United States already deals with the ratification of treaties, and the Constitution is very specific. Treaties are to be ratified only with the consent of 2/3 of those present in the United States Senate. So therefore, or you can even say wherefore, it's a contradiction of a resolution, or even if it was a bill or whatever you wanted to call this toy, it cannot be effective in terms of superseding the United States Constitution, because that was a constitutional requirement within the domestic laws of the United States. So for U.S. domestic law purposes, the resolution has no, it carries no effect, it carries no weight, and irrespective of what you say in the resolution, if it did not get the consent of 2/3 of those present in the Senate, and if you do the actual count, you will not find that those who were present in the Senate, that resolution did not pass by 2/3. There's some other things that needs to be taken a look at, and that is that because that subject matter is the province of the Senate, and because the Senate still had the question of Hawaii in its Senate committee, it did not release it, it could not pass it, so it laid in the committee. So out of the House of Representatives, Representative Newland introduced a resolution that should not have been given consideration because it was a matter already in the U.S. Senate, and it was in the province of the Senate to be addressing this matter. So within the rules of the U.S. Congress, that resolution was not to be taken or taken from the table or even considered. So anyway, that's that Newland's resolution and its impact. Now, you said something with regards to the resolution that I know it's a popular belief right now, but I don't necessarily align my thoughts with, and that is, and you didn't say it as explicitly as this, but other people have said it. The United States laws cannot extend to either international affairs or beyond the territorial borders of the United States. And there is an Attorney General opinion that borders on that, but that's not exactly what the opinion says. And I recognize that a lot of people have said, oh yes, we have a U.S. U.S. attorney's opinion and all that stuff. I believe that the Congress of the United States, if they act pursuant to the powers that they have within the Constitution of the United States, can pass laws that have an effect beyond its territorial jurisdiction. And how is that done? By using two other forks of this three-pronged fork of jurisdiction. They cannot reach beyond the territorial jurisdiction, but they can reach beyond it in terms of subject matter, that's right, or in terms of personal jurisdiction.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, if the other party, which is a valid party on the other side, consents, then they can engage in sort of like a contractual agreement, or what we call nowadays a treaty. So they can pass laws affecting a treaty. For example, the adoption of the UN Charter. Right. That's a treaty, and that goes beyond the territorial jurisdiction, but that's a particular type of law that becomes the law of the land. It becomes a law just like any other law, although it affects things beyond its territorial boundaries.
Yeah.
So you got to be very careful and I think the reading, and I'm sorry I don't have the U.S. Attorney's opinion on it, but if we read through it, I think a careful reading would come out with other conclusions than what others have reached.
Right. And of course, I also thought at the time, if you follow Conklin's reasoning and you follow it relentlessly, why the United States Congress can annex any territory it wishes. What's to stop them from, if you follow his reasoning,
all we need to do is dump in the word wherefore, and we can legitimize it. Yeah,
right.
It's wishful thinking.
And of course, if they can do that, why not the other countries too?
Yeah.
And so you have the law of the jungle now, right?
Yeah.
See, the only thing to stop you is if you think the other guy can bloody your nose if you try, right?
And all of those ideas, first of all, that's why you had finally the formation of what was considered international law as early as about the 1600s, and then they came out with terms such as New World Order. And New World Order didn't start with George Bush first. Back in 1945, they were using those terms, New World Order, in order to get away from this might makes right, which is what they accused Hitler of doing, simply because he had the power and went throughout Europe with his tanks and with his particular armament. But even before that, there was always this, whenever one had this, the best weapon or the secret weapon or the ultimate weapon, and it always came to different things. For a time it was elephants, and if you had elephants, then it was unstoppable. So what was his name?
Hannibal.
Hannibal, Hannibal and his elephants.
Yes.
So he could do whatever he wanted, and before that it was, of course, the Romans and, the whole Roman Empire as it went as far off into China until the Chinese beat them.
Yeah, right.
And so if you give respect to the idea of international law, and this is what Cleveland was talking about in terms of what is law? Is it only valid if it is enforceable, or does it actually require civil people, what I consider to be the Kanaka Maoli, people who are upright, to respect the law for the sake of the standards that it establishes, the pono that it contains. And on that measure, it requires a person of honor to respect it even more, because it cannot be enforced. And so it calls upon one's sense of honor, sense of ethics, to respect it. Now, there you're talking about a Kanaka Maoli. As far as my teachings of what a Kanaka Maoli is, an upright person, a true person, rather than something else. I know I'm sort of segueing into another subject. which is what we'll get into, a moment from now. But the international law has faced one drawback, which is the enforceability. And of course the question is, and who is going to enforce it? Not only whether or not it has the power of enforcement. And so Cleveland said, look, essentially said, look, gang, we have to respect international law. If not us, then who? And to a certain extent, that's what Britain said in 1843 when they sent, who was that, Admiral Thomas to Hawaii. Yeah, you had the power to take Hawaii. Who was that? The Carrisford and Lord Paulet and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you had the power. We have the power. But we cannot continue with this conduct, although in other places they probably did. Right. And even the U.S. after Cleveland, then you had McKinley, who turned right around and tried to legitimize the theft of Hawaii.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing I thought of was, and you know, these kind of people, they give so much weight to what the U.S. Congress decided. But, the fact is, just a few months earlier, our people, virtually the entire Lahui, registered their disapproval of this action. I mean, clearly and overwhelmingly. Yeah?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't that count for anything? You're going to let, a few hundred people in a foreign country decide that, hey, this is the way it's going to be?
And I think the true measure of a person or a country or a population at a particular time is that division between principle and interest. Not in terms of the banker's accounting, principle and interest.
Yeah.
But
Right.
But what one's principle is, and that was more the Cleveland approach, and the interest side, which was the Minister Plenipotentiary Stevens and Harrison and the McKinley administration. And it's a constant battle between the two, and it should not be, not the way I see it. If you really say that the heart and soul of a country is its creed, its principle, then it should be consistent with it. And there's something, I guess, similar to what Gandhi was saying. The test that we have is to have our national creed be consistent with the national deeds.
Yeah. Right, yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, we have seen these individuals, and we see it personified in Mr. Conklin. You and I know that the documentary record is crystal clear, It's, no credible historian, I think, will argue anymore about what happened and who's responsible. And yet, he will reach for all manner of rationalizing why it's correct, why it's legitimate. Now, you're the executive director of a mental health organization, yeah? So you have some insight into mental health here, yeah? What insight do you have to offer into this kind of is this somebody who enjoys the limelight? Does he enjoy stomping on us for some reason? What is it that makes this individual come out and say, because these kind of things, really, when he comes out with these arguments, and you really think them through, they're so easy to refute. Like this argument about what a resolution is good because it contains the word wherefore. You got to be somebody who's high on ice or something like that to say, well, okay, you're right, Why do that? He must love the attention, huh? Now, what do you think?
First of all, I don't think think we would even need to go that far into looking into because what I work with is a seriously mentally ill. Okay? And I don't think we need to, what is the word for it, inveigle or to pull in from that field. But in everyday people and in everyday thoughts, and whether or not a person has an illness, a mental illness or not, they still fall to certain traps, and some of the traps are personal interest that you want to protect. Another trap is that you come from, although you may be, quote, well educated, and of course Mr. Conklin is well educated, and he had been a school teacher before he left Boston and came to Hawaii. But people who arrive on Hawaii's shores, and this is something I was going to talk about even in Teach for America, that they had come to ask if I would address their core.
Yeah.
You know? But and so what I said is that as you come to Hawaii's shore, you come with certain baggages, not necessarily bad or not necessarily good. But it's part of the human condition that we come from our own experiences, our own framework of how we frame the world. And so to a certain extent, we see everything else within those eyes or within that framework. You have some people, however, who will refuse to allow any change or any different views of the world from other perspectives, and will insist on imposing their particular framework upon other people. And those are the people who have greatest difficulty in what I consider to be cultural competency or acceptance, or that frame of mind that when you come to a new place, you should also have the ability to understand new cultures, new principles, new laws, new histories, and the rest. In Mr. Conklin's case, first of all, I don't necessarily, and I will not categorize him as good or bad, because that's merely an expression of my disagreements with him or my agreements with someone else in terms of good or bad. I believe he has certain values that he holds strong to. I do not agree with those values. And I believe he has expressed those values in terms of the United States of America and its righteousness and its right to take other territories. And he will find whatever way he can justify it within the language of the law, within the excuses in which the United States have justify the taking of other territories. So in the Hawaii case, he tries to find legitimacy with the resolution on annexation, the Newland's resolution. He tries to justify it by saying, well, the United States was merely working with a sovereign nation, and that was the Republic of Hawaii. It wasn't the responsibility of the United States to look past that emblem of legitimacy, and they had the right in international law to deal with that country as a legitimate country, and its spokesperson was Sanford Dole, and that's all the United States was obligated to do. And that's more speaking out of interest and principle, because the United States itself was the one who created that country. The United States was itself the invader of the independent nation, and then out of that aggressiveness created this puppet government using American citizens, because these folks claimed at that time to be American citizens, and then switching back and forth to be Hawaiian citizens. No, we're American citizens, etc. And so the Soviet Union back in the I think it was about 1970s, 1980s, came through the United Nations, and the United Nations General Assembly agreed to it, that the definition of aggression is exactly what happened in Hawaii, and they had other things that they define aggression as. And then they said that no territory can be converted to the benefit of the aggressive state whenever aggression occurs. And what they are essentially saying is that this is not only new law, but this should be applied to any aggression that was done at any time. So when you look at broader principles, there's so many things that will reflect that Ken Conklin is not accurate with. But in terms of his motivation, I don't think we need to pin it to any mental illness or retardation or anything else. It's just, I would consider it a failure of his personality, a personality defect that does not reach necessarily what we call a DSM-4, the diagnostic manual of mental illness. You don't need to go that far, in other words. And finally, to close out on the subject of Ken Conklin, I know he listens to this program. He has called, and he called when we had that discussion of my feelings about the Native Hawaiian Roll Commission. And he is a very pleasant person to speak with, and when he's on the program, he's very questioning but very respectful, and of course I try to be as respectful to him. But I am not mistaken as to his telephone calls, and again, I believing that he may be listening to this program, I extend, of course, a welcome to him and any others who have some concerns, or if they choose to defend themselves, if they find it necessary, they're welcome to call.
No, really, and I hope they would. I hope that more of them would, because you really are such an effective counterpoint to them, Poka. You are well armed with the facts. You're always poised. You are so. So good at the wala'au, yeah?
Well,
you really are. But you have the reasoning to go along with it. So you are an excellent spokesman, for a cause. And, I think many of them realize this, and so they don't call, yeah?
I just noticed that
who would you rather play, Kahuku or Kalani, yeah? You know what I'm saying, yeah?
I just noticed my time is up right now. I got to go to music and then call back. We do have another caller, and so thanks for calling.
Okay, Poka.
Take care.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii, Kupa ama hope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, Pala pala anunu me ka paka. Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, Koku ana honoa o Pilani, Ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano, Pa'apu me ke one o ka kuhi hewa. Aolea e kau I ka pulima, Maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi, Po'ohui ai nā ku ai hewa, I ka pono sivila a o ke kana.